Hello, my name is Representative Pam Powers Hanley, and I represent LD9 in Tucson in the Arizona House. Today is April 19, 2022. Today is day 100. You might remember that the Arizona legislature has an annual goal of finishing our business for the session in 100 days. Well, we're still here, so we did not make that deadline this year. But one thing is that we are making at least a tiny bit of progress on the budget. The budget has finally popped up on the agenda, and there is a sort of a starter budget going on. You might remember that back in January, the Financial Advisory Committee told the legislature and the JLBC that we have $1 billion in ongoing funding to spend and $2 billion in one-time funding. Great news. In April, the same committee met and they said that we have even more money than they thought we did, and we now have $1.39 billion in ongoing funding to spend and $3.6 billion in one-time funding. So you'd think that we would invest in some of the things that the state needs, like public education. No, that's not what this budget does. One thing that's interesting is that this is an austerity budget, even though we're not in austerity and we don't need to be in austerity because, we have $5 billion. So it's kind of weird because this is presented as a skinny budget. You might remember that back in 2020, we passed a skinny budget, which was just a replica of the previous year's budget. And then we left town because it was 2020 and COVID was raging all over the place. So even though this is sort of proposed as a skinny budget that's all numbers and not such a big deal, it still includes some very controversial items. For example, the flat tax, which the people are trying to challenge at the ballot box in November 2022, is baked into this budget in different places. This also has unnecessary funding for the Koch brothers freedom schools at all three universities. It still has results-based funding, which favors high-performing schools and doesn't help low-performing schools. And it also includes money for the fake pregnancy clinics. So all that stuff is bad. But the problem is that it also doesn't include the good stuff. You might have listened to my podcast from last fall when we were talking about the amount of money that the state has, and that perhaps with cash in the coffers, we might invest in maternal and child health, finally. You also might remember that from a couple of my videos earlier this session, that there are bipartisan bills that support funding in maternal and child health. For example, the bill that would extend postpartum medical care for a year and bring us up to sort of the national average for this would save lives. Funding for that is not in this budget. You might remember that also Healthy Families helps moms be better moms. This was in Ducey's proposal. This is not in this budget. Other things that are not in it: funding for public education. You also might remember that the Republicans fought Prop 208, even though the people passed it at the ballot box. The Republicans were victorious in taking it down in the courts, so Prop 208 is gone, even though we spent years trying to get it on the ballot and we passed it. They got rid of it. So the voters wanted more money to go into public education, and Prop 208 would have put $900 million into K-12 public education. We have $5 billion. This budget could put $900 million into K-12, which is what the voters said they wanted, but it doesn't. That's not in there. It also doesn't have money for the Housing Trust Fund. It doesn't have money for the homeless. It doesn't have money for eviction relief. It doesn't have infrastructure except for a few pet projects. It does not expand cash assistance to the poor. It doesn't address chronic poverty. There is a lot not to like about this budget. The biggest thing for me is that when we have so much need and we have $5 billion, that we're basically leaving it on the table. Why would we do that? Why would we leave $5 billion on the table when our state has so much need?